Hello, welcome to Holistically Speaking. I am Morella DeVoe, your host. Our mission with Holistically Speaking is to be the avenue through which the voices of holistic health reach you at the time you need it most. And as you know, we often talk about physical health, emotional health. Last week we talked about career coaching and shifting directions. And today we're talking about the little ones, starting off from scratch with a holistic approach. My guest today is Debbie Millon, right? That's how you pronounce your name. And you are the, not principal, but the director of a school that practices holistic education, right?
That is correct.
And so, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I have to admit, I hadn't heard of a school calling itself, practicing holistic education. And so I was curious. I loved visiting your website, but I think that would be a good place to start for our viewers. If you could tell us, what is holistic education?
Well, holistic education, of course, our current education system is based in an old-fashioned model of kind of a mechanistic approach to teaching, and a holistic education model has emerged recently as a philosophy. It doesn't nail down to just one approach, but it's a philosophy of education that really honors the whole child, so not just their academic learning or their intellectual learning, but also their social learning, emotional, physical, their aesthetic, how they learn to appreciate art and beauty, as well as their spiritual, their nurturing their spirituality, that core essence in each of us.
Oh, interesting. Because in public schools, I know there's like no talk of spirituality or anything that even remotely approaches the topic. And it's funny because I grew up in Venezuela and I went to Catholic school where it was all about, religion and spirituality. So can you illustrate for us what the spirituality approach is in your model?
Of course, within each of us is this, drive to, find a deeper meaning or a deeper connection to not just ourselves, but to others and to the world. And it could be called different things in different religions, but it's there within each of us.
Right.
And if it's not nurtured, we can become very separate from it. We cannot necessarily understand what it has to do with who we are, how we make decisions, or how we are in the world. And I think as we age and as we grow through our adolescent years and into adulthood, more and more often society is asking us to become separate from that, to not be connected to our soul, to just move through life as fulfilling a certain role, but not really looking inward. So really practicing that inward discipline of looking at who am I, what makes me tick, what keeps me alive.
And for the little kids, so I'm imagining your little preschoolers as they're coming in, what are the sorts of things that you feel make that connection in terms of bringing their spiritual, their whole selves into the learning experience?
I think, starting with just even the aesthetic beauty of the classroom. So how we have set up the room, with lots of natural materials and natural light, or how a holistic school is just arranged from an environment, from a facilities perspective, just helps draw that out. But also, it's really practicing, as I said, allowing kids to be outward and be connected with one another, but then providing time for that inward, that breathing in time to, a lot of, in holistic education, you might see meditation practice or mindfulness practice, or just honoring that drive that we all feel sometimes, that we don't necessarily understand how to nurture it. So it can be done through conversations, through storytelling, through traditions, and sometimes it's through even nonverbal approaches. It's just done through modeling it as the adult in the room.
That's so interesting. I was actually looking at your website this morning and seeing the flow of the day, the different activities, and there are so many activities that are very unusual for an education setting, like reflection time and talking, meeting like agenda for the day, like what is it that we're going to do today, and then later in the day there's a reflection of. So can you tell us about how that model, what you see, the effect that's having on kids, and I don't know if you do this much of comparing the kids that are in your school and how that relates to the conventional education system.
Absolutely. So, basically, so not only is holistic education looking, as I said, as at the whole child, but it's so much about their relationships in the world. And so within the holistic education model, we're looking at, as I said, the child's relationship with themselves. So who am I? And my intellectual self is different than my reflective self. Right. Or who am I as a friend, and how do I handle my emotions? But the relationships between the children and their classmates or other people, and the relationships of the third branch being the relationship of children to their learning. So within the school day, by having these opportunities, like you said, of reflection meetings, so taking a moment to reflect on our morning, and providing time for that is critical. A lot of times children are rushed through a day, or they're told to go here next or to do this next, or and so having time to just slow down and reflect on the process, and not always try to get to the end product, but it's really about we holistic educators talk a lot about those spaces in between, those moments whenever you're going from lunch to a book. Can feel rushed sometimes, but in a holistic, we recognize so much learning that can happen right in there. So the parts of the day really are, each piece is really looked at as a learning opportunity to nourish those three relationships: the self to others, and the self to learning.
I keep saying it's so interesting because it really is opening my eyes to a whole new possibility for education. Just thinking of the contrast of my Catholic school, girls in uniforms, be quiet, and it's so confining in a way. I think I was telling you before the show, it's like how sad it was for me, thinking like, who might I have been if I had
a different experience?
If I had had that sort of experience. So we said we were going to talk about the impact that this model of education has on the community. So can you tell me about who are you seeing as who are you including in this definition of community?
I think a lot about holistic education really nurturing not just the children's growth and learning, but the parents and the teachers as well that are in that community, and recognizing that the teacher is not some authority figure that has all the knowledge that they are trying to impart upon the child. The teacher is seen as also a learning human being who's also unfolding still. There's not a day that we reach where we know it all, ever. And so when I think of one of the key, factors in holistic education that really build the health in that model is the quality of the teacher and who they are. We know that it's less about what you're teaching, the content you're teaching, than who you're being in the classroom. And there's so much that comes into that, because not only are they modeling inquiry and problem solving and collaboration, they're also modeling how they take care of themselves. So we talk, as a community around, what do I need? What brings me alive too? It might be journaling, it might be running, it might be being with my children, and making sure that the teachers in the school find that balance as well. Because if they're out of balance and they're not taking care of themselves holistically, then of course that's in the room as well, in the classroom. So that holistic model really, I feel, it's not just working with the children, it's branching out, as you said, to the whole community, the teachers taking care of themselves, and by virtue then the parents starting to notice, what am I doing in my life? Do I have this tempo in the day? Or do I take time to reflect? Do I take time to nurture these relationships? So
I would imagine that your parent-teacher conversations must be vastly different than the majority of them. I'm just thinking, wow, so in your model, you're also encouraging or looking at it from the teacher's perspective, saying, the teacher's relationship to themselves, the teacher's relationship to others as well, and to their, the context of teaching, right? So there's a profound honoring, I would imagine, of each person's individuality, whether it's teacher or student, right?
Absolutely. There's a sentence that we say and that I've heard said at, among other holistic educators across the country, and it started as we begin with the child. So before we get into academics or even the social, emotional learning or spiritual learning, it's really just saying, I will begin with you. I will start by seeing you. Mm-hmm. And we, at my school, we've moved that to saying we begin with the person. Mm-hmm. So who are you, and how am I honoring you and seeing you mm-hmm. within this community? And right, and so when parents come in for a parent-teacher conference or a meeting, we will sit down to talk about the mathematics curriculum or the other academic components, of course, that they want to make sure, my child is also learning some of the, this content and understanding, but also you'll be so excited to know how they negotiated this conflict today, or what they discovered in the wetlands today and what that meant in the greater context of their learning. And so,
wow.
Yeah, it's great.
And so you go from kindergarten, or what are your grades?
We start in preschool,
okay.
So ages 3.
Oh wow, really
yes,
little.
the young ones,
yeah.
the young, up to age 12 right now, so okay. Up to 6th grade.
Okay.
And we have plans to grow from that and add more grades onto the end, and hopefully go up to 8th grade.
And how many students do you have in your school?
We're small. We're about, we fluctuate over the years, but this year we have 43 students,
okay.
So relatively small. All of the classrooms are multi-age, which we feel honors that idea that we are a community of learners, mm-hmm. and there's not this definition of a 7-year-old must be doing this and an 8-year-old must be doing this. It's honoring that natural unfolding right. of the child and saying, we will place you in a room with other learners, other right. students, and you'll have opportunities to be both the older student in the room and be more of a teacher, or a younger student in the room and be more of, learning from the older students. And it doesn't always go, younger right. students are always teaching older students as well, as you can yeah. imagine. But that multi-age model, I think, really allows us to celebrate, that learners are all at different stages at different times.
Well, and it must be really fascinating to see. I'm just kind of comparing it to my school experience, where everybody's supposed to learn exactly the same thing, to do the same project, and they're rated on the same scale. And so when you have, in a classroom of, say, 20 kids, they're completely different, but yet you're applying the same
right, like objective or learning objective.
Same
right.
learning objective. And
right.
so, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just having like all
having
this
your personal
whole revelation.
It's, we believe so much in children being able to decide what they define as success. Mm-hmm. I can say that you need to do this or do that in order to, pass this class or something. Mm-hmm. But it's really trying to draw it from them. What do you want to do? When do you think you're finished? Have you put the most into this that you can? Yeah. And many holistic education schools do not give tests, mm-hmm. and they do not give grades. And that's, it's interesting, we were talking about that spirituality mm-hmm. piece. But when kids are getting grades, did you get grades in your?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So grades, we feel, really just compare students to one another.
Yeah.
So you might have worked really hard on something and only gotten a C.
Yeah.
And that might have been an easier subject for me, and I barely put any effort and I got an A. And yet so you're comparing to me, you feel that you haven't done as well, but comparing to yourself, did I put my best effort forth? Did I tap into
right.
my strengths and challenges? So really, you're feeling more successful in that than I did, where it was a breeze. Yeah. So it's this idea of letting the kids start to define their own objectives instead of trying to fit them all into one box.
Yeah. So I'm going back and wondering, how does working in this model affect the teachers? You probably have somewhat of the vision of being able to see the two worlds. You probably have insight into the two worlds. How does this model make a difference for the teachers?
That's a great question. I believe so much in the artistry of teaching, and that service, the service component of teachers, that teaching is a calling. And I think, like you said, looking into both, and I'm not an expert in the public school environment, but I know that some of that artistry and that autonomy that a teacher really, strives to have in a classroom is taken away in a public school because they're told what to teach, when to teach it, and how to teach it many times. And at a holistic education school, not just by honoring the teacher, but by honoring their voice and their artistry in the teaching in the classroom, along with the student's voice, so just that, voice and participation, just the teachers continue to blossom.
Yeah.
And I would, if I had a dime for every time a teacher said, I'm continuing to discover new things about myself and new things about teaching. So like I said, it's this learning and this discovery within the profession as well, and this yearning to do more.
It must be so fresh because it's not like they're teaching the same curriculum year after year after year after year. Every year and every student is going to make it different, right?
Exactly. And so it doesn't rest on one approach.
Yeah.
It really, you're looking at a different group of kids every year, and almost every day. We sometimes say each morning is a new day, and it doesn't mean that there's not planning and consistencies, but it really is. It breaks down those barriers.
So I'm curious if in a school like yours there's such a thing as special ed, or if all of it is special ed. It seems like,
Right.
Is there such a thing as special ed in holistic education?
We don't. We really look at each child as having their unique gifts to offer, their unique struggles and talents, and we don't use labels or special ed, things like that. There are many accommodations that you might see in either a school that is all for special ed needs students or something like that work for all kids, So if it's a more kinesthetic classroom, so more moving around or more hands-on learning, things like that are just accommodations we can make just by virtue of who we are. We also have very small class sizes, so some of that individualized learning that kids with unique learning needs might benefit from, they get just by being in that environment without needing to have a special education environment.
Exactly, because in a school where maybe the class size is 20 or whatever, I was in a class size of 33 with one teacher. So forget it.
Right, you had to fit in.
Yeah, so it's vastly different, I would imagine.
It really is, and it's those students, I mean, it's not to say that some kids don't need extra help with whether it's a struggle with learning to read or in math, or if it's a social struggle, if it's a behavior. I'm not saying that holistic education doesn't honor that and help that. It's just it's more inclusive of it. It's saying, right, and this is who you are, and this is what you need, and this is who you are, and this is what you need. We can reach a point where within the holistic framework, we have to look very closely at if one child's needs, specific needs, holistic education can work for every human in the world, but if one child's needs are such that meeting those needs are compromising our ability to meet the other students' needs in the classroom, or it's noticing a teacher's time is not, well balanced between the whole community, we might need to, figure out some additional accommodations for that child, whether within the school or beyond the school. But that's just really advocating for that child too.
Which is, it's almost like what all kids need in any school, is to have that advocacy. And so how do your kids do when they move on into the public school system, if they go off to public high school, or how do they do?
They do really well. They do really well. It's such a wonderful, part of my role to be able to check in with students who have graduated from Bellwether and who are now either, like you said, in high school or in college, and what they're up to. And you know, how they're using their skills and their strengths to contribute to the world, you know, unbelievably so, you know, starting debate clubs and doing also just that, like we said, nurturing their sense of self has shown them, I can make a difference, and I have a voice, and I can participate in this world. It is a transition period after they've left our small school where they're seen and they're known and those relationships are nurtured to go into this new environment that their voice isn't as welcome, hundreds of kids, bells and tests and homework. So we try to prepare kids and families for what that transition might look and feel like. And how to, you know, give them some skills to navigate that. And you know, I think we've provided them that foundation of learning how to learn and understanding that knowledge is not a fixed entity, that once I have it forever. Like it's a process of discovery and you know, continuing to learn how to learn. So.
Well, and it's funny because my previous guest on the show was Ellie Byers, and we were talking about career exploration as teenagers. And I would imagine if a child who's grown up encouraged to explore and develop their sense of self and know what they like or they don't like, and you know, just feel free in their exploration, that by the time they're 15 or 16 and maybe starting to look at career exploration, they have a much stronger foundation, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned, I wonder who I would be if I had gone to. I do the same. You know, I went to an amazing independent school, but it was more by, you know, it was much more structured and more typical. But it's so true that I met with a couple of graduates last week, and the conversations I was having with them, and just, you know, they understand very early what their passions are, and how to use those to best make a difference in the world. And you know, I wish I had had that.
I know, right?
What do I want to do? Who am I?
So you have a lot of resources for our viewers that I want to make sure that we go through before we run out of time. So we want to show you how to find the Bellwether School if you have little ones that you might want to consider sending to the Bellwether School. So the Bellwether School's website is bellwetherschool.org. I spent quite a long amount of time on it this morning, and it's really, really engaging, fascinating. I would encourage our viewers to visit you. And then you have these other websites. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about them. HENT.org.
Yes, HENT.org is a holistic education. I might not know exactly what it stands for, but it is a very complex website full of lots of information on holistic practice, holistic education. It's actually out of Australia, but and it also, within there, you can find links to many other organizations that are practicing holistic education in some sort, whether they're full schools or whether they're schools within schools. It's a fabulous website to kind of get lost in, articles and
like
resources.
I got lost
like you got lost
on your website. And then the next website that we have is holistic-education.net, and what will the people find there?
Likewise, they're a little more finite, but some articles on the balance between freedom and structure in holistic education, that, you know, that when we find balance between those two, we can really meet all different learners. And a man named Scott Forbes, who has written quite a bit on the history of holistic education, has quite a few articles up on that site as well.
And the last website is educationrevolution.org, and that sounds very interesting.
It does. We need a revolution.
Yeah.
Well, as I was saying at the very beginning, just this idea that holistic education has emerged in response to what seems like an outdated model of education. So the folks at Education Revolution it's an organization for alternative education schools. So whether it's homeschooling or unschooling or you know, Waldorf school or Montessori school, all of those are alternatives to, of course, the public school model. And holistic education, I like to look at it as the umbrella that captures all of those, and sees value in all of them. There's value in a Waldorf approach. There's so much value in Montessori and homeschooling. So together,
And you know, just hearing you speak about the revolution and you know, looking at the inherent problems in the public school system, I can't help but think of the recent conviction of the teachers in Georgia.
In Atlanta.
Yeah, where, you know, their bonuses are tied to the students' scores in tests, and we know that the testing system is awful. So, you know, talk about a negative impact on the whole community.
On the whole entity.
The kids, the teachers, everybody. So it's a really sad, sad story.
And just like you said, when your employment is now linked to the, it has it all backwards. You know. So,
yeah, I know.
Well, you know, just in my one of my final thoughts of thinking about holistic education is rebuilding, which is why I think that education revolution, it's rebuilding education or redesigning it from the bottom up. Yeah. Is really looking at, like, let's just start with the child and their relationships and go up from there versus let's start with some test and curriculum from.
Right. So you also have some books. I think that yes, we have some books to show you. I'm remembering.
Oh, yes, there we are.
So books on holistic education. You have a couple by Ron Miller, Caring for New Life, Essays on Holistic Education. And then you have What Are Schools For, also by Ron Miller. And then these other two books, Holistic Education by Scott Forbes, and Holistic Education, I never know how to say this word.
Pedagogy
of Universal Love. But I do know how to say this name, Ramon Gallegos Nava, which is
beautiful.
You know, not having grown up in the U.S., sometimes I look at words like, I don't know how you say that.
You're right. Yes.
So tell us about those books. What highlights from them?
Well, Ron Miller, who's the author of two of those, he is one of the founders of Bellwether School, and so his words are very close to all of our hearts. And in both of those books, he writes about, you know, holistic education philosophy, some of the principles of holistic education, and he keeps it zoomed out enough to where you can start to see how holistic practice, it doesn't just have to be one whole school, that there are some holistic practices that can trickle in and are trickling into public school settings and into small towns and communities that see the value of that. So both those books are very dog-eared in our school, very well used. And then, of course, the last two are just two other authors that inspire us. As I mentioned before, Scott Forbes, whose website I also posted, and Ramon, who used the fourth one. Similarly, looking at holistic education from a broad perspective, and almost using words like cosmic education, just this honoring of the whole, the universe, society, community, down to the child, and how that looks.
So are you currently taking applications for your school? Is your admissions process open?
We are open right now, yep. We are accepting students in all of our classrooms, which we have 4 classrooms. So I host tours of the school, which is a wonderful chance to walk around and absorb everything. Yeah, it really is. And it lights us all up when people are there to see and share our school.
And just hearing you describe the classrooms made me want to go visit and see, like, oh, I want to see what that's like.
It's amazing.
Do you welcome children in at any level, or does it have to be in preschool, or?
Any level. Okay. Any level. We've had families who've started from preschool and stayed all the way through to 6th grade. We've also had families that have tried other schooling environments that haven't worked for their child, so have come to us in 1st grade or 2nd grade or so.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It has been so clearly eye-opening for me. I think there's so much hope for children and for future generations the more that this model continues to evolve and trickle into all other education settings. I think the beautiful thing about what you do is the reality that we can't each thrive as individuals if our ecosystem isn't thriving. You know, a child can't thrive if the teacher isn't thriving, if the school setting isn't thriving. So we all need to thrive together.
So well said.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks,
and thank you for joining us. I hope to see you next time. Take care.